Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Telesklov. I'm the project director of the FAST initiative. FAST stands for Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking. I'm here with my colleague Andy Shen, who is our government and multilateral organizations lead, and we both work for the United Nations University Center for Policy Research. We were planning to have this session in Geneva as an in-person event. Unfortunately, the Omicron variant has turned our program upside down, but we were able to turn the presentations that we were planning to have in Geneva in that week into a webinar. And thanks to the engagement of our panelists, we are able to share this with you. The Building Bridges event brings diverse actors together, including governments, NGOs, academia, the private sector, the finance industry in particular, international organizations. And we all are here to collaborate around a common vision of advancing sustainable finance to address the United Nations SDGs. Our program is funded by a number of governments, including the Principality of Liechtenstein. And I now have the pleasure to introduce you to Kurt Jäger, the Ambassador of Liechtenstein to the United Nations in Geneva.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today in this format after the initially planned in-person event during the UN Building Bridges Week had to be cancelled last minute. It is our aim to catch up with that occasion and contribute in this virtual setting to the goals of the Building Bridges Week. This important event brings diverse actors from the finance industry, the United Nations, other international organizations, NGOs, academia, and government together in a collaboration around a common vision of advancing sustainable finance to address the Sustainable Development Goals. While we of course would have preferred to hold the event in person, it is still an honor to be with you today and to welcome you on behalf of the permanent mission of the Principality of Liechtenstein in Geneva. Our deep appreciation particularly goes to our co-sponsors, the Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking Secretariat, FAST, Walk Free, and FinTrack for joining us in organizing today's event. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the international community agreed long ago on the universal abolition of slavery in all its forms, and yet, to this day, modern slavery and human trafficking persist around the world, with shocking levels of impunity. Ending human trafficking and modern slavery is a priority for my country, Liechtenstein, in line with the 2030 Agenda, which provides us with a framework to make the world socially, economically, environmentally more sustainable. And the fight against modern slavery and human trafficking is a key component of this agenda. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a call on all of our societies to build back better. This must include redoubling our efforts to end trafficking and modern slavery. Leveraging the essential role of the financial sector in ending human trafficking must be a crucial part of this effort. So we welcome the declaration, the political declaration on trafficking in persons that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in New York a few weeks ago, which clearly references the need of public-private partnerships to prevent and detect human trafficking, and the recognition of the important role played by financial institutions and initiatives, of course, by member states to contribute to ending trafficking in persons. In this regard, we're happy to recall Liechtenstein's flagship SDG initiative, FAST, Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, which is a public-private partnership embedded in the UN system. FAST places financial institutions at the heart of the fight against human trafficking and modern slavery by outlining action in the areas of compliance, responsible investment, and financial innovation. It is supported by Australia, the Netherlands, the Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, and recently also Luxembourg, as well as various private sector partners. The initiative is managed by the United Nations University Center for Policy Research, and FAST is continuously expanding its reach and making progress in its dissemination and implementation efforts. Enhancing partnerships for FAST will remain a key objective of Liechtenstein's engagement on the 2030 Agenda, in particular meeting target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also goals 5, 8, 16, and 17. Sustainable finance, meaning increased attention to environmental, social, and governance factors, is a central part to the FAST project because it can create new pathways for investment that are key in helping us achieve the SDGs. It is of essential importance that we treat the ESG framework in a holistic manner, as it was conceived for in the 2030 Agenda. The S, or social components of ESG, are among the least measured factors in corporate sustainability, despite being among the most impactful. We need to do more to amplify the S in ESG, in particular in the context of ending human trafficking and modern slavery. This is as much a policy issue as it is a national commitment for Liechtenstein. And I'm looking forward to a rich discussion at this event and invite all of you to approach us if you would like to join forces on the FAST initiative. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Yeager, for your comments. We fully agree, and we're very pleased to see the United Nations member states recognize the value and importance of financial institutions in the fight against trafficking and other forms of modern slavery. I would now like to introduce Walk Free, an Australian NGO that is our partner in IAST APAC, the Investors Against Slavery and Trafficking Asia Pacific, and also Liza McDonald from Aware Super, and Mons Carlsson from Ausbil. FAST is pleased to partner with Walk Free as a knowledge partner in IAST APAC. We recognize that the UNU CPR has a distinct role in this partnership, and we are very pleased to support the efforts of the members of IAST APAC by providing technical expertise and support for their activities, including their engagement with their portfolio companies, policy advocacy, and reporting under the Australian Modern Slavery Act. I would like to turn now to Matthew Coghlan from Walk Free for some reflections and insights on the work of Walk Free, FAST, and IAST APAC.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matthew Coghlan, the Financial Sector Engagement Manager in the Business Engagement team at the Walk Free Initiative. I'm very happy to be part of the FAST and Walk Free panel on the role of finance to end modern slavery and human trafficking at the 2021 Building Bridges Week in Geneva. I'm speaking to you from Melbourne in Australia. Walk Free is an international human rights group focused on ending all forms of modern slavery. We take an evidence-driven approach using our research, such as the Global Slavery Index, to advocate for stronger policies and better business practices. We see the financial sector as playing a critical role in ending modern slavery. A key part of this is leveraging the power of investors to identify and assess modern slavery risks in their portfolios. We are a founding member of the Investors Against Slavery and Trafficking Asia Pacific Initiative, or IAST APAC, and also act as its secretariat and knowledge partner. IAST APAC fights modern slavery through business engagement and appreciates the power of the investor community in leveraging change. We are participating in the IAST APAC initiative to offer dedicated modern slavery knowledge and connections in a wide range of stakeholder communities: business, finance, academia, government, civil society, and also survivors. We believe this will help the investors to make more responsible investment decisions, be more effective stewards of listed companies and investment portfolios, and collaborate with each other in a multi-stakeholder setting. As a founding member of IAST and a member of the steering committee, we have been really excited to see investors leading this initiative and taking collective action to drive better practices. In IAST, we hope to see investors engage with companies to assist them finding, fixing, and preventing modern slavery. The IAST investors have identified focus companies to engage with in 4 sectors: consumer staples, consumer discretionary, healthcare, and technology. Investor groups engage with these companies. A lead investor coordinates the engagements, and the lead investor is assisted by support investors. The investor groups essentially set goals or key performance indicators for these companies to improve their practices. Companies that do not have a well-developed approach to modern slavery risk management, this might mean mapping their supply chain and communicating their policies with suppliers, as well as conducting due diligence. For more advanced companies, this might mean using technology to understand the real risks to workers, ensuring that they have effective grievance mechanisms and that they are actively responding to known risks. The key thing is that the asks that the investors are making of the companies are tailored and appropriate to the risks that the company has in relation to modern slavery. As part of this stewardship approach, each of the investor groups have prepared engagement plans for their focus companies. And they are expected to engage with these companies at least once per year, if not more, to discuss the objectives in the plans, determine how and if the companies are achieving them, and provide assistance where possible to help the companies. The investor groups will be completing confidential quarterly reports to track their engagements with their focus companies and to identify progress against engagement plans, as well as identifying the challenges that they encounter and best practices that they've used in their engagements. The IAST APAC initiative will publish an annual report summarising company engagement results in mid to late 2022. The results will be aggregated and anonymised. Walk Free is concerned that there is a lack of data to assess and mitigate modern slavery risks. However, we are starting to see a range of reporting requirements on modern slavery, and this will lead to more data for investors to act on. In one of our other projects, also with the FAST initiative, we're working with stock exchanges to develop guidance on how companies should address modern slavery risks and what they should be reporting or disclosing to the market. We will be launching our first one of these new tools with the Stock Exchange of Thailand in 2 weeks, and our hope is that it will improve the data available. It's also worth noting that investors do currently use a wide range of different data sources for assessing modern slavery risk in their investment portfolios. They include sustainability reports, modern slavery statements, ESG indices, research reports, and company engagements, such as those through the IAST APAC initiative. Despite this, we believe that there is a need for regulators, issuers, and investors to provide modern slavery and related labour exploitation data in a consistent form and content to allow investors to make the most informed investment decisions. Walk Free and FAST are the knowledge partners of IAST. We are responsible for identifying and organising knowledge events to support company engagements and other IAST activities. We also provide ad hoc expertise as members of the steering committee, and in the case of Walk Free, as the Secretariat, organising the co-chairs and the steering committee meetings. If similar coalitions were to be built in other parts of the world, like IAST APAC, we believe that having a core group of dedicated individuals is really important, as is having partners with subject matter expertise. It's also important not to reinvent the wheel and to leverage the frameworks that have already been developed. At the end of the day, we really want to see uniform standards being applied in terms of what businesses should do to identify and address modern slavery risks and how they should report on it. So the closer we can work with other organisations who are also working in this space, the better. There is also a lot we can learn from the progress that has been made on the climate change front. We should be looking to climate change initiatives and the standards that have been developed to incorporate those learnings into our human rights engagements. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I wish you the best for the rest of the panel.
Good afternoon. I'm Liza McDonald, the Head of Responsible Investment at Aware Super. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event, albeit virtually, from Melbourne, Australia, and pre-recorded. It would have been fantastic to have done this in person. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Aboriginal land and pay my respects to traditional owners, custodians, and elders past, present, and future. At Aware Super, we have $150 billion in funds under management and over 1 million members. We also have over 1,000 employees. We're one of Australia's largest industry funds, providing superannuation advice and retirement solutions to those who teach, nurse, care, respond and help others in our communities. At a fundamental level, our strategy and motivation has always centred on doing well and doing good, delivering the best possible outcomes for our members while being a force for good in our community. The role of finance to end modern slavery and human trafficking. Such a really important topic, complex, but really important that investors such as Aware Super are focused on, Modern slavery has become one of the major thematic projects for us over the last couple of years and will continue to be a major theme. At Aware Super, we've been integrating ESG into our investment process since 2008, when we signed the PRI. Included in that has absolutely been a focus on the S issues and how we look at things such as workers' rights, supply chain management, responsible sourcing, safety, and how companies adhere to international conventions such as the International Labour Organization and the UN Declaration on Human Rights. However, with the introduction of Modern Slavery Act in Australia, we've enhanced our focus and now specifically include modern slavery as one of our key social focus areas. As part of the introduction of the Australian Modern Slavery Act, our entire investment portfolio is captured as part of our operations. So it's just our corporate operations, it's also our $150 billion investment portfolio invested in every jurisdiction, region, and sector. So it's certainly a huge ask and task in terms of how we look at and address modern slavery in our operations. We have to report annually and disclose under a framework. However, for us, it's not just about the compliance. It's absolutely about how we can go further and how we can collaborate across the sector and effectively drive change. So as part of our overall approach, when we were looking at how we could implement modern slavery across the whole of the portfolio, we certainly believed that a collective voice of investors was one way we wanted to ensure that we could drive change. We know that collectively asking for the same ask from companies, collaborating, pooling resources and being able to use the weight of investors will achieve change and we will get action as well. When we and previously we'd looked at an initiative in the UK, CCLA, it was called Find It, Fix It, Prevent It. And we were a part of that through our partner, Federated Hermes EOS. So when the Australian Act came into play, we were approached by another fund manager, First Sentia, in terms of how we could take that initiative and potentially bring that to the APAC region. So with that, we sort of formed a smaller group of investors and like-minded investors as well, and sort of started to collaborate and bring together our thinking of how we could bring that initiative and really get the investors in the APAC region involved. We invited a number of other investors along and sort of sat down and mapped it all out, and what came was Investors Against Slavery and Trafficking, APAC. And it really has been a collective and collaborative effort of a number of like-minded investors to sort of sit down, work out what we want to achieve, what the purpose of the initiative is. And with that, we ended up with around 5 or 6 sort of founding members on the steer code. And it's been a great journey, and we've also been really lucky that we had the Find It, Fix It, Prevent It framework that we could take from the UK and then start to think about how we could implement that, particularly in the APAC region. We, having been involved in that, and I guess thinking about how we could get the buy-in of our organisation and why would we be involved in an initiative like that, was absolutely no it was probably more from our board, what are we doing? How are we leading? How can we actually use our investor voice on this issue and really see change? So that we had no pushback or any issues in terms of our internal team and our board in being part of this initiative. It was certainly seen as us being a leader and us being able to really use our size, being the second largest asset owner in Australia, to bring together a group of investors to set about driving change when it comes to modern slavery.
Mons Carlsson, Head of ESG at Ausbil Investment Management. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Why is your firm participating in IST?
Well, at Ausbil, we have a long history of engagement and advocacy on modern slavery and human rights, including engagement with companies where we try to encourage best practice, and also directly with the Australian government, where we've done some advocacy. And ultimately, the way we see it, modern slavery is a systemic issue. It's not a company-specific issue, which is why we think it makes sense to collaborate with other investors on this. And simply put, the more investors who engage on these issues, the more likely that companies will take up the ideas we have on best practice. And we think it makes sense for investors to collaborate on systemic issues, because not one investor, not one company, not one government will ever be able to solve these issues on their own. So collaboration is very, very important. And we think that IST APAC really provides a forum for investors to share best practice, share ideas, and ultimately act as a united voice on these issues. And we're keen to keep the engagements very consultative with companies, because it's not about naming and shaming companies or point a finger. It's about finding ideas, solutions for best practice that ultimately de-risk companies and their supply chains. And of course, that also helps humans who are trapped in modern slavery and other labor rights issues too. And of course, produce more sustainable investment returns too. Because many people talk about this as an ethical issue, which it is, of course, and it is for investors too, but it's also a financial issue. So let's not forget that, because simply put, if a company's business model relies on underpaid workers, weak regulation, or even illegal activities like slavery, that's not going to produce sustainable earnings over time.
And how did you convince your senior management to participate in IST APAC?
Well, convincing Ausbil to be part of this was actually quite simple, both because of the financial angle of this issue, but also because of our history in this space, both in terms of advocacy and company engagements. So we're currently an investor representative on the Modern Slavery Experts Advisory Committee. So we're working with the Australian government to effectively implement the Modern Slavery Act. We also assist the Modern Slavery guidance. We assisted the Australian government about the guidance for the Modern Slavery Act. And on top of that, we're also chairing something called the Human Rights Working Group of the Responsible Investment Association Australasia. So there is a natural link there. But also, on top of this long-standing engagement program on modern slavery and human rights, we do see alignment with what IS trying to achieve and what we're trying to achieve in our own engagement. So in actual fact, it was quite a simple process.
And what results do you expect?
We expect this to be a multi-year journey. And as such, we hope to see companies take up the ideas we have on best practice. But obviously, different companies will move at different speeds. So it's going to be a journey over many years, because companies are at different stages in terms of their responsible sourcing efforts. We also expect companies to increasingly understand and act on the link between modern slavery on the one hand and then broader human rights issues on the other, because slavery doesn't just emerge out of thin air. And sometimes there is a very fine line between what's technically modern slavery and what's just poor labor rights. There's a bit of a grey area. And in my career as an ESG researcher, I've been very fortunate to travel to factories, particularly in the garment industry, in Cambodia, Thailand, China, Bangladesh, etc. And when you go there, you get a good understanding of the complexities of the labor rights issues that companies are facing. And by speaking to workers, unions, NGOs, and leaders on responsible sourcing, you get a feel for the complexity, but you can also see what's best practice, what innovations are there, and what are different companies doing. And then you can take that information with you back home and engage with companies and encourage them to adopt those ideas. So that's a way we've acted and engaged for a long time. And these ideas have a business case. So we hope that by sharing these examples that we've found with other investors, more investors will engage with these ideas in mind and actually lead to positive change.
And how do you measure impact?
Measuring impact can be tricky, and it can also be quite subjective. Company engagements have engagement plans with objectives and goals. So some of them are fairly measurable. Others will be very subjective assessments and are very intangible in nature in terms of assessing the level of progress achieved. But I don't think that's unique for this ESG issue, because environmental, social, and governance issues in general, they are quite intangible by nature. But we think it's important to have this discipline with engagement plans and regular reporting against that, because that's going to ensure that investors stay focused on their engagements. And then we need to assess companies over and over again to see where they're tracking. But we've got a system in place for that.
And how do you react to concerns that there is a lack of data to assess and mitigate modern slavery risks?
Yeah, data is a problem, but again, I don't think it's particularly unique for this type of ESG issues, because as an ESG researcher for over 10 years, I think I've just had to learn to live with that, lack of data in some places. And I think in Australia at least, but also elsewhere, as other regulators focus on this, the Modern Slavery Act in Australia, I think that leads to better disclosure, and that's going to improve over time. So I think as time goes by, there's going to be more and more information available. But more concerning, I think, is the fact that the companies themselves have fairly poor visibility over their supply chains, and COVID has certainly not helped with that. And if you look at how most companies are addressing this with factory audits, well, factory audits are only scratching under the surface, and they're often just done at the tier 1 level, and they're only a snapshot in time. So that's one of the fundamental underlying issues here, I think. So if factory audits were magically going to solve all the issues, that would have happened a long time ago, but it clearly hasn't happened, because many of the issues we're looking at are hidden, often deep down in the supply chains, beyond tier 1 factories. So supply chain visibility and traceability are key issues we focus on in our engagements. And before that's been improved, I think it'll be very hard for the companies themselves to solve the issues. And that makes labour rights, and particularly modern slavery, which is illegal in most places, quite different from an ESG issue like climate change, for instance, where carbon emissions are very transparent, they're very readily available and disclosed. But it also reinforces something I talked about before, which is the importance of field trips and speaking to different stakeholders. Because being on the ground, speaking to relevant stakeholders who are in the know, I think that's crucial. You can't just base your research on desk-based research. I think this issue is way too complex for that.
And what is the role of Walk Free and Fast as knowledge partners in IST?
Yeah, I've always argued that systemic issues require a broad-based solution, and to that end, multi-stakeholder frameworks are particularly good. So while the member base of IST APAC is strictly restricted to investors, we're very pleased to see the involvement of Walk Free and Fast in this case as a secretariat and also as a knowledge partner, because both can contribute significantly with expertise and deep knowledge on the issue of modern slavery and human rights, particularly as this is not a static issue. It's constantly evolving, and as investors, we need to make sure we constantly keep pace with what's happening and the latest development. So we're very pleased to have Fast and Walk Free involved in this initiative. And I think IST APAC is actually a really good example of what can be achieved between different stakeholders who have a similar aim, but come from very different backgrounds. I think IST APAC is a great example of that.
So if similar coalitions would be built in other parts of the world, how would you set them up? Do you have any practical tips or any lesson learned that you can share?
Yeah, I think the whole thing about having a multi-stakeholder approach is very important, because as investors, of course, we're one particular stakeholder, and ultimately our role is to provide returns for our clients and our members. But that should not come at the expense of human rights issues. In fact, I don't see a trade-off between human rights and financial returns. If anything, companies that manage these issues well should provide better financial returns over time. So while we investors have our focus on returns, to many investors, the issue of modern slavery is quite new, which means it is great to have knowledge partners and links to civil society who can fill those knowledge gaps. So this is again why I think multi-stakeholder framework are so good. The other learning, I think that goes to any type of collaboration and multi-stakeholder framework, is you really need people who are truly passionate and dedicated about the issue itself, which I think have at IST APAC.
Mons Carlsson, Head of ESG at Ausbil Investment Management. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our colleagues from Walk Free and from the IAST coalition. I think this is an excellent example how private sector, public sector, and the UN can work together to achieve very concrete results. Investing in businesses and lending to businesses exploiting forced labor in particular, or modern slavery in more general terms, is an important area of our work. But the finance sector is also connected to trafficking and slavery by handling the proceeds of crime. Trafficking and slavery generate over $150 billion every year. This money will ultimately end up in the financial sector. And it's very important that governments and the private sector work also together to detect these proceeds of crime in order to seize them, confiscate them, and return them to the rightful owners, which are the victims of the crime. A lot still needs to be done in that regard. But we would like to show you an excellent example that has started a few years ago in Canada. Our colleagues in Canada have set up a public-private partnership that has advanced the fight against slavery and trafficking by using the power of financial investigations and financial analysis. And I'm very happy now to not only introduce you Barry McKillop, who is the Deputy Director of FinTrack, the Canadian Financial Intelligence Unit, but also Timea Nagy. Timea is a survivor of trafficking. Timea has been a member of the Financial Sector Commission who has been doing all the groundwork for our project. And Timea and Barry are both great friends and supporters of the initiative. It's a huge pleasure for me to hand over to both of them, and I think the message they will be sending is a very strong one.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. My name is Barry McKillop. I'm the Deputy Director of Intelligence at FinTrack, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit in Canada. And I should start by thanking Daniel for the invitation today to speak to you about the importance and the criticality of using financial intelligence in the fight against human trafficking. Obviously, this is a heinous crime. It's a crime of global proportions. And I think there is definitely a role that everybody needs to play in this, regardless of which sector that you work in or which sector that you may work in the future. Obviously, in Canada, we have our Project Protect, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We have about 10 minutes here, so we won't be able to do justice to everything. But I do want to turn the floor over right now to Timea Nagy, who really was the inspiration and my inspiration for Project Protect. She's a very good friend, and I think you'll be very impressed with her story, where she's come from, and how she's been able to be a mover and shaker in her own right in the fight against human trafficking. So Timea, if I may, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Very kind of you, Barry. It's always such a pleasure to follow your footsteps or present with you. And again, I also would like to thank Danielle for inviting us to have this important conversation. So my name is Timea Nagy, and I am a survivor of human trafficking. And I wasn't even 21 years old when I came to Canada from Hungary. And I think you were able to deep dive in my story, Barry. So some of this is not going to be new to you. But the one thing I can say is that at almost 21, going through a traumatic childhood, the one thing I can say that I wasn't fully emotionally developed, or I didn't have a proper way of figuring out right from wrong, good, bad. I mean, obviously there is a lot of fundamental foundation was missing for me to be able to make really healthy or informative decisions. So as such, I ended up coming to Canada because we had a lot of house bills to pay, and we were about to lose our home in Hungary, me and my brother. And I came to Canada because they offered me a job that sounded amazing, $1,500 a month, only for 3 months. I could pay off our house debt. But when I arrived in Canada, it wasn't actually a family agency. It was actually an organized crime. And quickly, within 12 hours, I was sexually assaulted. I was stashed into a strip joint outside of Toronto. I didn't speak English. I didn't have money. My new home or my new life was I was living in a hotel and in a motel. I was working 20 hours a day. They didn't feed us. We were fed actually only just once a day. I had a cheese sandwich every day and iced tea, which now created pre-diabetic conditions. And that's just one of the long-time trigger and effects. But basically for 3 months, I was what you would call a sex slave. So there's no food. I couldn't sleep. I was taken to club, to motel, to club, to massage places. And physically, I was just drained. I went down from 125 pounds to 89 pounds in less than 2 weeks. So, you can't talk to anybody. You're not allowed to talk to anybody from outside of your group. In the first 2 weeks, you pretty much realize that this is it. Like, you probably gonna die here. They were threatening us every single day. What's gonna happen if we escape? There was one time when I was starting to really think about escaping, and I was sitting in a club, and this old lady came in who was dressed in black and spoke Hungarian in Canada, which is unheard of. But she was actually here because she came to collect her daughter's remains. So we found out that she was actually killed, and our traffickers took credit for it. They said, "This is going to happen to you. You next if you don't do what we say." So mentally, physically, and emotionally, you just become a zombie, and you don't know who to trust, and you really think that this is where your life is ending. And I remember making probably about $40,000 for them cash by myself, handing it over. And I left Barry with like no money when I escaped from them. I had absolutely no money to show for after being there for 3 months. I couldn't call home. I couldn't let everybody know that I'm at least alive. And I lost everything. And when I went back, when I escaped eventually, with the help of Canadian people, I ended up going back to Hungary, but it wasn't the safe place because at the time, nobody knew what human trafficking was. Nobody had any training. So the Hungarian police completely mistreated me. They were going to put me in jail while the mafia was after me too. So I had to escape Hungary and leave my entire country and culture and language and family and friends behind and never look back. So some people say, well, she was only trafficked for 3 months, but that 3 months completely changed my life.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. And I must say, Timmy, I am so proud of you. I'm proud to know you. I think you came to a conference to talk and basically challenge the financial sector as a whole, including FinTrack, even though you didn't know what FinTrack was at the time, to see if we could make a difference, because you can't just arrest yourself out of this problem. There needs to be more than just police looking at that, and police need help and they need tools. So what was it that kind of motivated you or tweaked you to say, maybe the financial sector can play a role?
Quickly, I'll tell you what it was, and I'm so glad it happened because the movement hasn't been the same since then. And that's how I met you, and you totally changed the movement in Canada, you and other colleagues, but you were one of the leaders. So I'll be always forever grateful. But I was on front lines and ended up working on front lines as a crisis worker with victims of human trafficking. And I went to over 300 court cases, and we lost one after another because it was a he said, she said story. And we lost the last case it was a horrible case. And when the judge said, sorry, there's nothing to see here, and dismissed the entire case, I was like, there's gotta be another way to do this other than put everything on a victim. So I ended up going to a bank conference, and I was just frustrated because the court ended. And that's when I said, okay, who's in? Like, can you guys help us to solve this? And you were one of the person who got up and said, yes, we can. So I'm very thankful.
Well, the realization, and I've been in this business for a long time, so it wasn't news to me, but I think for a lot of people in that audience to realize that modern slavery, human trafficking, exploitation of humans was actually happening in Canada, I think was an eye opener. And it really did lead to a number of people standing up and going, well, we can't just stand by. We have to take the blindfolds off, right?
And you didn't just stand up. You guys created a project now, a project that's known around the world, Project Protect. And now I would like to say how proud I am. And not just about being proud, but the work that you guys done is incredible. And I know that other countries are waiting for you guys with open arms to see how you did it. So how did you do it?
Well, it was kind of organic. I mean, you remember Peter Warwick was working at the time at BMO with Stuart Davis, and basically we just sat down, talked. There was about 20 minutes in my office, and we figured out, you know what, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to look at all our transactions in our database, and we had 260 million of them, and at BMO at the time and other banks were going to look at the transactions in their databases that were related to known human traffickers. And what we did was we put all that together at FinTrack, and we identified very specific indicators that could act as red flags for human trafficking. So there's never just one indicator, but when you take all these indicators or some of these indicators together, it actually does point to human trafficking as a predicate offense to money laundering, which allows us at FinTrack to take reports. It allows the banks really, and a lot of the banks provide most of the reports to us. It allows them to submit what we call suspicious transaction reports that identify, in most cases, not only the trafficker, but the victims, because we see the money going back and forth, and they're small, not large amounts of money, so which is why they come in as suspicious transaction reports. And they really identify who the trafficker is, who the victims are, and then we can take those reports from all the banks, because they don't share it between themselves, but they all give it to us. So we're in a unique position to use our financial intelligence abilities to link all these transactions together and to provide them as actionable intelligence for law enforcement. And that's really the value added of FinTrack.
It's amazing. And I know you don't like to brag, but if I'm correct, I think you guys took the human trafficking suspicious activity report from like 215 to like 4,000 something. It was some crazy numbers. Now I might be off, so can you please correct me? But I know our audience will love to hear that stat.
No, certainly on the STR front, it jumped probably well over 4,000 now. And that's really testament to the work and the commitment that the banks are really putting in, and the Western Unions of the world and the MoneyGrams of the world. They're really putting a commitment into addressing human trafficking. And I really do think that speaks to their reputation as an institution, the social good that they can play. And what it has led to is, I can tell you, before we had Project Protect, we probably did, we were around for 16 years, we probably did about, 50, 60, 70 disclosures on human trafficking. Since then, we've done well over 1,000 disclosures to law enforcement. We had a project a couple of weeks ago. It was Project Ioni, where the police were able to take down a human trafficking ring and arrest people and identify victims and help them become survivors. And it was fun. It was fun. It was nice to see in the press release that the police turned and said, it was because of information from the Canadian Human Trafficking Centre and FinTrack that we could launch this investigation. And that's really the key to this whole Project Protect and its success, is 80% of the disclosures that we do to police are proactive. That means it's regarding people and networks and victims that they don't know about yet. And that's really the successful component for us and for others. And that's why we seek any opportunity to speak internationally about this. It doesn't have to be done the same way in all countries, but I think it does reflect the importance of each sector playing the role that they can play in combating human trafficking. And I share your goal in eradicating this crime I'd love to say next year, likely not going to happen, but if we looked at 5 or 10 years, if we could eradicate this globally by playing the role that we can and the role that everybody can, I think it's really important.
And this is why I said how proud I am of the work you guys doing. So this is why it's always such a pleasure having these joint conversations with you, because it always inspires me and motivates me to keep speaking to more financial related audience. So thank you for having me, and thank you for all the hard work that you guys are doing there.
My pleasure, and thank you. And I don't think we can finish this without mentioning your online institute, because once we identify victims, they do become survivors. And to leave them on their own and have them go through what you had to go through to become the strong survivor that you are, I think you need to take a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes to talk about what we can do for survivors.
Thank you so much. So there's so many things, and there's so many incredible organizations and sectors that are taking it upon themselves to help survivors to reintegrate. The road that I decided to take is to start a social enterprise, which is TC Online Institute, which is a for-profit company. So we offer education, a survival-led education, but our company hires survivors to educate, and every single department in our company actually have a survivor. So we have editors that are survivors, we have graphic designers that are survivors. Some of our customer service is actually going to be done by survivors. Consulting is being done by survivors. So that's our tiny little way of helping to give back. We also give little microloans because they still have to work on their credentials and stuff. So that's our kind of small way of giving back a little bit.
Well, I think it's a big way, and I thank you for that. I obviously wish you all the success. Daniel, I think we'll turn it back to you at this point. I do want to thank you once again for the opportunity that you've given to me and I to talk to you. And I think you can tell that we are both emotionally committed to addressing this. And I'm sure I can speak for Tomei in saying that we are always available should you need anything else. You have my contacts. Daniel, if anyone in the audience wants to reach out, please feel free. And once again, thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of your conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think we have seen some real good examples of how we can work in practice in collaboration with the private and the public sector, and what role a UN institution can have in this process. I wonder, Andy, turning to you, but what are your key takeaways from these presentations?
I think the common theme is the vital importance of survivors, both to inform interventions, but also to be part of the design and to be the central focal point for activities relating to modern slavery and trafficking. And Daniel, where do you think FAST is heading in the next couple of years? How do you see us supporting more of these initiatives in the future?
Well, first of all, we'd be happy to support more initiatives, in particular those that are investor-driven or financial institutions-driven. We have the necessary resources, we have very committed donors, and we can continue to support these initiatives. Investor coalitions in other geographical regions, public-private partnerships in anti-money laundering in other countries. So certainly we remain engaged and we remain very committed. Let me use that opportunity to also thank all our panelists for their contributions. I hope the day will come where we can meet again in person and have a discussion among us how we can achieve even better results as we have already achieved. Thanks also to the organizers of Building Bridges. That's a great opportunity for partners like Walk Free, the IEST coalition members, FIUs in Canada, and survivors to present what they have achieved and lead by example. So thanks to our colleagues in Geneva for that. To all of you, I hope you enjoyed our webinar. You will see in a second an email address where you can ask any questions to us. We will get back to you. And please also sign up to our newsletter, which we will show you the email address for that in a second too.